Good morning, everybody. Author of the new book, Land Rich, Cash Poor, Brian Reisinger is our very special guest today, Thursday, September 19th, 2024. For DrydenWire.com, I'm Ben Dryden, and you're watching DrydenWire Live, presented by Americans for Prosperity Wisconsin. AFP Wisconsin works to reignite the American dream and break down government barriers that hold us back from our full potential. Find an event near you at afpwisconsin.com and join AFP to fight for more freedom for all Wisconsinites. Quick programming note, Kirk Anderson will be hosting a live show with his special guest directly after this show. I think ours, we're stopping around 9:15. His show will be starting at 9:30 this morning. And tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m., we'll be welcoming back to the show the Milwaukee Brewers President of Baseball Operations, Rick Schlesinger, who I think just wants to come on. He was on a few months ago. I think he wants to come back on just to throw it in my face that the Brewers won the Central Division and my Cubs didn't. So that'll be tomorrow morning. But today, we are chatting with our very good friend, one of the absolute best dudes on the planet, and author of the new book, Land Rich, Cash Poor, Brian Reisinger. Bohemian, good morning. How are you?
Hey, good morning, Ben. Thanks for having me.
Dude, you wrote a book. Who does that?
I wonder that myself after having gone through the process.
Yeah, and I'm so fascinated about this. I want to learn about the process. When did this start and all that? But for people who haven't heard of this book, I know it's out there a lot. I think I saw Adam Jarkow post on it saying that he was reading it, actually listening to it. So now I started listening to it because I didn't realize, wait, I can just listen to it and not have to read it? The problem I found out is I had my headphones on, was working, and after 20 minutes I realized I'm not getting any work done because I was so into the book. But for people who don't know about that book, what is it about?
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, and I really appreciate what Adam was saying online. He's such a great guy and so has so many insights, and it was really meaningful to see that and so much of the other feedback we're getting. So the book is a hidden history of the disappearing American farmer, and I grew up on a farm in southern Wisconsin in driftless country. And what I try to do is I look at our country's history and I try to find hidden eras of history that have driven the disappearance of our farms to try to figure out what's that story beneath the surface that has caused that disappearance. And then I weave that with my family's story. We've been on our land for more than a century, ever since my great-grandparents escaped pre-World War I Europe, all the way through the Depression, the farm crisis, on up through today. And farm families go through a lot. So what I found as I was working on the book is that those issues in our economy and in our government and in our society that were driving the disappearance of farms lined up with some pretty harrowing things that my family went through over the years. And so that's what I pulled together to write the book.
That's what the book is, Land Rich, Cash Poor, my Family's Hope and the Untold History of the Disappearing American Farmer. But at the very top there, I found that interesting. On the right side, in bold, the hidden history of an economic and cultural crisis that is threatening our very food supply, the disappearance of the American farmer. So I did buy the book. My mom read it, and then I got it back. So it just came out a month ago. My mom read it, and then my wife has been reading it, and again, I started listening to the audio version, so I'm about 2 chapters in as of yesterday. I think like hosts are supposed to say, "Oh, I read the book," and full disclosure, I haven't finished it yet. I just started.
Yeah.
But where is that connection there? Where is that connection to where it says, threatening our very food supply? How does that tie in?
It's a really crucial question because I think a lot of people do care about the hollowing out of rural America that's happening, not only our farms, but our rural communities, manufacturing jobs, et cetera. The challenge is making sure that people understand the impact to everybody because it's something that even more people need to care about. This hollowing out of rural America happens to be affecting our entire food supply, and here's how. The reality of the situation is that as more farms disappear, as more links in the supply chain disappear, we have larger links in our supply chain, and it's easier for that supply chain to get disrupted. So when people look at food prices, why are food prices so high? One of the reasons is that our food supply chain is so easily disrupted. It's sure not because farmers are getting more money in their pocket. When the consumers are paying more and having a hard time, you can bet the farmers are having a hard time too. It's partially because that supply chain is so easily disrupted as we've had more farms disappear and we have fewer and fewer companies that are able to be distribution channels for our food. The second reason is that innovation and productivity in our farm sector, although it's long been a proud tradition and farmers are continuing to work and be more and more efficient, the innovation, the technological change, the productivity hasn't been spread across all farms. So many of our farms are being left behind by our technology. So we have a supply chain that's easily disrupted and we have productivity in our food sector that is not keeping pace with the rest of the world. Therefore, food prices are higher, number one. Number two, when there is a disruption like COVID or bird flu or an invasive pest or weather, people sometimes don't see the food they need on the shelves. And if they do, it's again more expensive. And also, people are wondering more and more about what's for dinner. People are increasingly worried about what's in their food. Is it high quality? And people are increasingly looking at local fresh options, but they don't have those local fresh options because of the disappearance of our farms. So whether it's the price, whether it's the availability, or whether it's the health, these are all being affected. Every time we have a farm disappear, it makes it harder and harder for the American consumer to have what they need on their dinner table.
Is this also, is this like, yeah, this is why like corporate farms are bad? Is that what this is about? Or is it, no, not saying that that stuff is necessarily bad. How does that tie in between the local farmer, like passed down, like your family, to,
Sure.
corporate farms? I think there's a better word for it, but we'll just call them corporate farms, right? Large
Sure.
farms.
We wrestle with that issue in the book. And the reality is that a lot of people are surprised by this, 96% of our farms in this country are still family farms. 88% of them are small.
What? Say that again. Do you say 96%?
Yep. 96% of our farms in this country are family farms.
I never
80,
would have guessed that.
yeah. People think that they've been wiped out. They've been disappearing at an alarming rate. We need to be worried about it. But 96% are family operations, 88% are small farms. There are farms that have gotten bigger, and those bigger farms do supply a lot of our food supply. And the reality is that some farms on the upper end of that are corporate, but so many of them are family farms. The real problem that we have is that our family farms and our small farms are continuing to disappear at alarming rates. They've disappeared for about the past century at a rate of 45,000 per year on average. So 45,000 per year for 100 years. That's what we've been doing. We've lost 70% of the farms in this country. So we do still have a lot of farms of different sizes, nearly 2 million. But the problem is they can't make enough money to make a living on farming alone. And so they aren't able to be a serious part of our food supply. That's the real challenge that we have.
So your farm. Tell us about your farm, your family's farm.
Yeah. So I grew up on a farm that's a century farm, meaning it's been our family for more than 100 years. It was founded by my great grandpa in 1912. He came over he grew up in Bavaria, so did my great grandma. And he had served in the military. He did not want to serve in the military in World War One with what was coming. So he came over to America to try to find a better life. And she did too. They hadn't met when they were in Bavaria, although they lived 3 miles apart. They met here in America and they got married.
What?
And yeah, just incredible when I think
Right.
about what
What are the odds of that? Yeah.
yeah. Even crazier, they started our farm in the 1912 Great Blue Norther. And that meant that there was winter tornadoes, sudden swings in temperature, all kinds of deaths. And my great grandpa climbed into the remote hills of driftless region of Wisconsin and decided to buy this farm in the middle of all that. My grandpa, his eldest son, grew up through the Great Depression and climbed into the middle class in the 1940s and 1950s. My dad and mom took over the farm from my grandpa and grandma, and they survived the farm crisis. Today, our farm is still operating. My sister has more talent for crops and cattle than I do. So while I've had a career off the farm and while I help on the business side and they throw me in a tractor now and then, my sister is working to take over the farm for my dad, which is a real blessing. We're very proud. And at the same time, we continue to deal with challenges. We went through the economic shock of COVID and other things that have had to lead to changes. Our farm's still operating. We raise heifers for other dairy herds. We raise beef for consumers, and we raise cash crops. But we had to go through a lot of changes, including we had to sell our milk herd in 2021, and that's like the death in the family. And so, the hardship continues, but so does the beautiful way of life.
You said COVID, and I know that was referenced in here in the
Well,
book. How did COVID, for people who don't know, I mean, I grew up in rural, I live in rural Northwest Wisconsin, and you're talking about your farm is down in southern Wisconsin, right? It's like Sauk County, I think.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So we grew up around farms. Like all of our neighbors were farmers. I don't know anything about farming other than I see the farms everywhere. But how does COVID? I mean, I'm thinking when I hear COVID and how does it affect a business, I'm thinking, is this a one of those businesses that the governor says, okay, you can have 25% capacity, or you have to wear masks? Well, you're a farmer, so like, how does that actually affect rural or small farms, family-owned farms?
I'm glad you asked because a lot of people really only experienced one half or the other half of this crisis.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting when we had the opportunity to put it together in the book and see what happened in full. So the way it affected farms is, in addition to, farmers were affected like everybody else. Like, how do you navigate getting to work and how do you navigate being around people? What do we do with these health limitations, et cetera, all the different things that everyone was sorting through. But what was also happening to farmers is the supply chain was shutting down. So the food processing plants, the distribution centers, all of these different links in our supply chain that I talked about that are more vulnerable because there's fewer farms and because those links are bigger and more easily broken. That supply chain disruption affected both farmers and consumers at the same time in kind of crazy paradoxical ways. So what happened is farmers weren't able to sell their goods. And if they could sell it for far less because there were fewer places buying their goods because the supply chain was locked down. We couldn't move the food through the system. So there was milk getting dumped. There were animals getting slaughtered. There was produce going to waste. All that was happening on the farmer side, while at the same time, the American consumer wasn't able to get what they needed in the grocery store. People are saying, hey, where's this? Where's that? And if I am able to find it, it's more expensive. Why is that? Well, that supply chain in the middle was locked up. So farmers couldn't sell their goods. Consumers couldn't find the food that they needed. If we could have linked these two groups up, we wouldn't have had a food crisis, but we couldn't. And we had this supply chain that was locked up and broken down. And so farmers were being devastated at the same time that the American consumer was being devastated.
Is there, now that you've gone through COVID, or we went through that, and what I mean you is in your farm, if it happened, unfortunately, how about this? Knowing what you know now, what would you have done differently as a farm, as a small farm back in 2020 when this happened? Or is there, or is it one of those things like nothing? I mean, we can't do anything different. It's just how it goes. Or is there an answer? Is there a way that, boy, if it ever happens again or something similar, I mean, there's things always happen. This is how we should have approached it.
Yeah. Well, there are things that we can do. The issue is that they're all long-term answers that we have to get working on now. The reality is the only way to avoid what would have been going on in COVID is for farms like ours to be able to be marketing to consumers in a direct way and have much more of our food economy based around people buying in local and regional rural economies rather than buying food mainly off of the national supply chain and the international supply chain. We would need to have an economy set up where more people are buying directly from the farmer. That's a world we can get to, but it will take a while to get there. And not only did COVID show that not having those options for people, for both farmers and consumers, not having a robust rural regional economy all across the country, not only do we not have that for COVID, and that was a problem, COVID was just the biggest shock to the system we've seen, but it's happening right now. So look at the price of eggs. Why is that? There's a variety of reasons, but one of the things that has driven this is bird flu, making it harder and harder for the chicken industry to raise chickens and to raise eggs. So it's another example where it's so easy for our supply chain to get disrupted right now because we have this large supply chain with a few links in it. And so we're seeing it with bird flu. Every time there's some sort of a thing like that, or an invasive pest, or weather, or a war across the globe that affects the grain market, anytime something like that happens, we see food prices shoot through the roof. And the reason for that is because our supply chain is so vulnerable. So COVID was the biggest example, but it's happening right now.
When I saw Adam Jarko's post on Facebook, who's referencing your book, and he had said that he had cried, and my wife has been, Jerusha, she's been reading your book, and it was actually just last night. I came in and I saw that, she was a little teary-eyed. I'm like, let's go. Of course, he's a caring husband. It's what's going on. And she was reading your book. And I'm like, why? So, and I didn't ask her. I'm like, don't tell me what it is. I want to ask this question to Brian tomorrow morning, which I'm going to do now. Why, of just the two people that I know, actually my mom read it too. Why do you think that elicits such an emotional response in parts of your book?
Well, I appreciate hearing that. I don't want your wife unhappy. And,
me either. But she said it was, in a good way. It was emotional.
Yeah. Well, different people come to this issue from different perspectives. Some people really care about that hollowing out of rural America and that loss of way of life. Some people really care about what's happening to our food supply. Some people both. The thing that I've found that really connects with people, and it's what connected with me and what I hoped would connect with people, is the personal story. And so, our family, like so many farm families, has gone through some, pretty incredible things. And it's a beautiful way of life. It's also kind of a heartrending way of life sometimes. My great grandparents really literally dug their living out of the dirt. They were living in poverty, trying to get established when they came here doing subsistence farming. My grandpa, growing up in the Great Depression, lived through some incredibly difficult times. My parents, same thing with the farm crisis. The thing that I think people connect with is that human story. And I'll give you an example of one that really moves me. And I think it's one that has connected with a lot of people. Just the example of my dad. When my dad was 8 years old in the 1950s, he had to step up at the tender age of 8 to take on the work of a man. The reason for that was my grandpa had been climbing a corn crib, and he slipped off that corn crib and he fell 30 feet through the air, landed on the frozen ground in the middle of winter and broke his back. Now, he eventually recovered and got back up on his feet, but in some ways things were never the same. And my dad, when his dad's back was broken, stepped up at that tender age of 8 and had to work alongside the men who came to help, work alongside his mom. He took on the work of a man, and he never really quit. And so my dad is 72 now, so he's been working for 64 years like that ever since he was a little boy. And, it's the kind of thing that it gets down in your blood and your bones. It's part of why he's so passionate about our way of life, because he's been devoted to it since he's been a kid. On the one hand. On the other hand, think about an 8-year-old having to step up and do that because his dad is laying broken in the back bedroom, not able to do the work. That's an incredible weight that's put down on a child in that situation. And this happens through every generation, where the passion for our way of life is a beautiful thing, but that weight that presses down on each generation, are we going to make it? The last generation made it through the Depression. The last generation made it through the farm crisis. Are we going to make it? What are we going to do? That's the kind of weight that presses down on every single generation of a farm family.
Well, bonus for your dad. I mean, 70 years of doing this, he must be really racking up vacation time, right?
Yeah, if only. If there were days off and vacation time for farmers, if there were 401ks for farmers, if there were any of those things, my dad would be sitting pretty right now.
Yeah, I remember going over to a friend's house when I was young, and he was on a farm, and 5:30 in the morning, we stayed up to like 11, 12 o'clock watching movies, right? We're middle school kids or something, and then but 5:30 he's getting up and going out to do chores, and asked if I want to go with him. I'm like, I'm sorry, do what now? Go where? Is it just chores? I'm like, not really, but okay. So we went out for 2 hours, going out into the barn, and we're shoveling stuff and sweeping stuff and feeding things. I'm like, do you do this every day? He goes, yeah. I'm like, really? That's so weird. Like,
yeah.
And that's when it first hit me when I was young. Obviously, we all know that now, but at some point, you get to the point where you realize, wow, farmers never get any time off. Like, if they're sick, they still got to go. If they're hurt, they still have to go out. If it's Sunday, if it's raining, if it's storming, if it's cold, if it's hot, like, you can't not do it.
Right. And I grew up working with my dad from the time I could walk, and whether it was feeding cows in the barn or it was bouncing around in the tractor with him, the reality is that you're right. It's something that doesn't quit. Yeah. And
hey, hold on 1 second. I got to close these blinds. Jeepers creepers.
Oh, yeah, you know.
Sorry about that. I was like, I couldn't even see myself anymore.
There was a light coming down on you as we talked, and I thought we were having like a spiritual situation here.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah. And good morning, by the way, Wayne and Carol, and there's my mom, Diane. She's read your book as well. Good morning, Mom. And Representative Gay Magnifici says, I grew up on a farm. Can't wait to read your book. And there's a question here real quick from Carol. Brad asks, what will change the agricultural mentality of go big or go home?
It's a great question. And I hope that the alarming pace at which our farms are disappearing will change that, and also the fact that we're at a time where people care more about where their food comes from than ever before. So in some ways, there's an opportunity here. We've lost 70% of our farms in the past century. We've still got nearly 2 million left. The reality is that most of those farms, that 88% of those farms that are small, the way they're making it is by farmers working 2 or 3 jobs. They're working the farm, but they're also working a factory shift, working on a construction site, pouring concrete on the side, that kind of thing. We need to find a way to make those nearly 2 million farms growing entrepreneurial ventures again. And we're at a place where we've lost so many farms. It is such an alarming problem, and where people care more than ever about where their food comes from. My hope is that we're in a moment where we can recognize this problem. So to that exact point, if people can begin to say, I want to know where my food comes from, I want to make a change, we can really do something about this. There are a lot of things that need to change. Of course, we do need consumers to begin to buy their food from more than one place rather than just stopping off at the local grocery store. Please also stop at a local farmer's market, buy from a CSA, buy from a local farmer that has a food stand, or buy from the local butcher shop. I'm not saying you have to have 20 places you buy your food from, but if all of us change a little bit how and where we get our food so that we know where more of it comes from. And by the way, there are a lot of grocery stores and restaurants that are increasingly carrying local options. Yeah. Ask them to carry local fresh options, that kind of thing too, so you can continue to patronize the places where you already buy food too. We got to do that, but we also have to change a wide range of government policy, revitalize our rural communities. There's all kinds of big systematic changes that need to occur. But the first thing is getting that mindset of wanting to know where our food comes from, wanting to create new opportunities for our farmers.
Do you think some of these farmers, because let's face it, not all of the kids that grow up on farm end up being on the farm, right? They graduate or not, yeah, they move out. They're rural America, then they go into the big city life, and they go to college, and some of them come back and kind of take over the family farm, but a lot of them don't.
Yeah.
Which means kind of that younger generation of how things work. I mean, speaking of my mom's aunt this morning, we've always gotten like a half a cow or a quarter of a cow and half a pig, all from my parents' neighbors. And we've always done it. Like when I'm driving home, like, oh, we're going to be eating one of those next year. So we have deep freezes, and that's where we get it. It's better quality. We know where it came from. And like you had just said, it's like direct from them. Like they take it to the butcher shop, and then we get it from them. So we do that every year. But I'm wondering, some of these farms, you had mentioned earlier something about technology, and I don't know if this really fits in with that, but how do farmers who I don't even understand, I don't even have a computer, or I don't understand Facebook, or I don't know how to market look, we've just always done this because that was our neighbors and that's what we've always done. But how do some of those get that information out that, you could actually just buy it from here? Do you see that being a challenge?
It is a challenge. There's a cultural shift. A lot of farms are getting more savvy about that. But also, there's technological barriers, right? I mean, rural broadband is a real issue in the state of Wisconsin. We do need to figure that out so more people can get internet connections, farmers as well as consumers, as well as all kinds of other small businesses, everyone in between, right? So there's those kinds of barriers. The biggest barriers that I would say that we can also make a change to enable those consumers to get to those farmers and to enable those farmers to be able to sell to those consumers is to change government policy that's standing in the way. So there's a number of things. One is, in the 90s, we used to have free trade, galore, and people loved it supposedly, but it began to lose support. And now we really don't pursue free trade deals the way we used to. What we need to do is we need to find a way to open new markets for farmers through free trade, but we need to make sure that it's fair trade. And one of the ways to do that is to have narrower, smaller trade deals rather than these great, big, huge trade deals with multiple countries across all sectors of the economy. Target specific types of goods that we can get American farmers to sell into foreign markets with. And it's easier to enforce because we have one country that we're dealing with on one good. And so you can make sure that people aren't cheating. The cheating by China and others is what made so many people throw in the towel on free trade, right? So we need to do things like that. We also need to make sure that all of the markets in America's domestic economy are competitive. We can't have monopolistic practices. We can't have so few companies in an industry controlling huge swaths of that industry, being anti-competitive, keeping small businesses from being able to compete. We need to make changes like that. Another one, you mentioned technology. We need to have a research and development revolution in this country. We have stopped having what's called scale neutral technology in this country. We have some of it, but not nearly what we need. And scale means, what it means is large, medium, and small farms would all be able to adopt this technology. So if a farm's going to take on some technology, they need to be able to have a practical way for it to work for their operation, and they need to be able to afford it. They need to be able to say, okay, if I put out the money to pay for this, it's going to pay for itself in 5 years or whatever the horizon might be for the savings. Too much technology is geared only toward farmers being able to take more and more and more and more field rows on and more and more and more and more animals on, to the point that a lot of our technology is geared only around the very biggest of farms. So we need a research and development revolution in this country where technological innovation can once again bring small farms along. It used to be that small, medium, and large farms all had the opportunity to advance. So if we have consumers that want to know where their food comes from, and we have farmers who are pursuing new entrepreneur opportunities, and we've got technology treating our farms the same, and we've got government policy getting out of the way so that this new entrepreneurial opportunity can occur, then we can begin to see a change. But if we don't do all of these things, it's going to be difficult for it to change, and we're going to continue to see farms disappear.
Is there, I'm hoping their answer is no. Is there a political component to this? And by that I mean, is there like a partisan thing where you see one side more than the other side? And I really hope the answer is no, because I mean, honestly, I don't see how that would necessarily matter. But then again, politics is politics, and it always seems to be something. Is this one where somebody's kind of pushing it more, or have you actually noticed that? No kidding, I think this may be one of the first times that this is completely everybody loves this. Everybody recognizes this. It's just a question of, are we going to do it or not?
Absolutely. Here's the issue. both parties talk about their love for farms. They both profess
They
their love.
do. Yes, they do.
But do they really do anything that makes for any change? So both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party establishment for a long time throughout decades of history have both failed our farmers. And there are all kinds of examples. Now, there are individuals who do care about this that are trying to make a difference. I saw Representative Gay Magnifique on. So glad to have her. There are people who understand these rural issues and who are trying to make change around them. So there are individuals, but by and large, it's been true that throughout our history, both parties have really failed our farmers. I'll give you an example. My parents grew up in the 1980s farm crisis. A lot of people in Wisconsin remember that because they grew up in it too. And it was really difficult, especially in northern Wisconsin. Here's what happened. Under both parties over the years, the U.S. government was encouraging farmers to get bigger. And it was that get bigger, get out mentality. And one of the ways they did that was with government fueled debt. So programs that made it possible for farmers to take out debt. You can argue about whether you think that's good or not, but the reality is it was meant to help farms be able to make it financially. Well, that debt and all this encouragement to get bigger led to bigger farms with all kinds of debt. Mm-hmm. Within a few years, that same U.S. government increased interest rates like they've been doing the last year or two here. And the reason they were doing that is to control inflation. But that also makes debt more expensive when those interest rates go up. So what happened is you had the U.S. government telling farmers, hey, take out all this debt, get bigger, get bigger. And then they said, hey, all that debt, we're going to make it way more expensive, put you underwater. So you had people who had decades to pay off debt suddenly underwater on tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, and their loans were getting called in, and they had to pay it off. And so you had farms getting devastated and driven under. Those are conditions that were created by both parties over time in different ways, and there's endless examples throughout our whole history. So there's a lot of people who talk about caring about farms, but the reality is that the policy hasn't always kept up with those intentions.
The ones, I'm glad you referenced Representative Gay Magnifique, because those are the ones that I do actually see them passionate about it. And by them, I mean rural legislators. And that kind of makes sense, right? Because that's where you're from. Like all the representatives in our area, it's all rural, man, and farms. They actually do understand that, holy cow. And a lot of them grew up on farms or live next to farms. Like they actually live the life or are a part of that life. Do you see this actually? I know I did skim through your book when I first got it, and I always like to go to the ending. I'm like, okay, he's going to give any like ideas or plans, and there is some in there. I'm not going to give them all away. People should just buy the book. But do you see those things, your suggestions? Here's how we fix it. Do you have any hope that it's going to get fixed?
I do have hope. And the reason I have hope is because those nearly 2 million farms that are left, even though we've lost 70% of them, as I said, 96% of them are family farms. That's nearly 2 million farm families that have survived depression, farm crisis, economic up and downs, globalization, all kinds of things that have wiped out tons of farms. And so there's a resilience there that we can tap. And if we could find a way to make those nearly 2 million farms growing entrepreneurial ventures again, we could really make a difference. So some of it is what I mentioned before about an R&D revolution. We need a whole new generation of technology that makes it possible for not only large, but also medium and small size farms to innovate. Part of it is making sure that our international and our domestic markets are competitive. But then there's also more things and things that can be done not only on the federal level, but also state and local level. Revitalize our regional rural economies. There are so many rural areas that have just been devastated. What they need is new small business growth. What they need is consumers buying directly from them, whether it's farmers or other types of small businesses. There are changes that we can make to do more about this. And one thing that is true post-COVID is people and ideas and money are more mobile than ever, right? So a lot of people have the ability, if they live in a city, they have the ability to continue with their job, but move into a rural area. If people live in a rural area, they have the ability to take a remote job that can create new opportunity for them from afar. This ability to kind of blend our urban and rural economies is a real opportunity because the rural economy has been isolated for so long, left behind for so long, that if we have more people coming back and forth between the urban and rural economy, that means more ideas, more money, more customers. If we've got a farm that's trying to sell a new product that they've got a local niche for, and there's more people coming to their area, they're going to have more economic opportunity. So there are things that we can do, but we've got to make a change. There's no question about that.
So your book just came out last month. I just wanted to bring this back up because I can't remember what was all on there. There it is at the bottom. So it's available at Amazon Books or Amazon.com. IndieBound, never heard of that. Barnes & Noble, that's still a thing? Barnes & Noble still a thing? I thought they went under. Really? That's crazy. And then
Yeah.
also the Audible, which is what I'm listening to right now, which is fantastic. Plus your website. Now, I'm not wrapping this up. I have more I want to ask you about. I just want to quickly bring that up. Your website, I think, is just Brian Reisinger, right?
Reisinger.com.
.com.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yep.
So people can go there and learn more about you, learn more about the book. Plus, there's those links if you would like to purchase that. I highly recommend it. So how did this book come to be? When did you first have the idea? How about that? When did you first have the idea? And was it about this, or was it first, I want to write a book? Oh, wait, what am I going to write about? Or was it,
Right.
how did this all come to be?
Yeah. Well, in some ways, this story's been with me from the beginning. I grew up with my dad working on the farm, and I remember getting on the school bus and seeing the number of kids that were getting on the bus from farms that weren't operating farms anymore. I remember teachers saying, "Hey, raise your hand if you grew up on a farm," and me putting my hand up. And every year there were fewer and fewer kids. So in some ways, this story of farms disappearing is something I grew up always knowing was happening. I didn't realize what was going on until I got off the farm and went out and worked in business journals and then public policy for a number of years. And I saw what was going on in our economy. And I saw people talking about the good years at this point and that point. And I thought, when the hell were the good years? And I realized that the larger national economy was leaving behind places like where I grew up. So the idea for the book kind of formulated then. I started working really hard on it about 2 years ago.
Oh.
And I said to myself, I'm going to begin by investigating every era of history from the time of my great-grandparents up until now. And I'm going to look and I'm going to say, hey, what are the issues that drove that? What are the hidden stories beneath the surface?
Sure.
What I found as I did that is that each one of those hidden eras connected with something that my family had experienced. And so that's how the book kind of came together. And so it's been a long journey if you count, 4-year-old Brian looking around wondering where the farms were going.
Yeah. Was this a project? Was it originally kind of I'm really doing it for myself? And, if I end up finishing it and makes it a book and it gets published, great. But did it start that way, going, I'm writing this book and it's going to be this? And did you know that's how it was going to work when you decided to start writing?
Yeah, it was about the passion for my family and our way of life.
Yeah.
And although farming wasn't my calling, I loved my roots. I loved where I grew up, and I'm happy to be connected with it now, helping out on the business side. And my parents throwing me in a tractor when I'm home on my days off.
Yeah.
And the reality is that just gets, as I said, down in your blood and your bones. And so I wanted to write something that would honor my roots. And what I realized as I went along is the best way to do that is to just tell the truth about it. My family and I talked about, we talked about mental health issues. We talked about addiction issues, talked about all kinds of things that a family goes through when they're going through this kind of economic hardship. And we agreed that we just wanted to tell the whole story, tell the truth, because if we want people to be there for us when our farm gets through COVID, they have to know just how bad it was. If we want people to appreciate what my grandpa did by climbing out of poverty into the middle class, they need to hear about his drinking problem to understand what he went through and some of the costs that he, faced as he went through those difficult times of his life. So we decided we were just going to tell the whole story. And I'm honored that my family was willing to do that with me.
I was just going to ask. So was it, hey man, some of that stuff, did anyone in your family can we leave that one part out?
Yeah, it's a good question. I thought a lot about what parts of our family story really do genuinely connect with what was going on in the broader economy. I didn't want to tell a story to write some tell-all. I wanted to say this story of my great uncle when he was 2 years old being crippled by his father's horses, that connects with my family trying to survive subsistence farming, which was what was going on in the broader economy at the time. Let's tell that story. So I was very deliberate about what stories I wanted to tell. And when I talked with family members, whether it's my dad, sister, mom, or my great aunt, or my grandma, or different people over the years, I talked to people in every single generation, except for my great grandparents' generation, because they'd passed away 2 decades before I was born. And every time I talked to someone, I said, my approach here is I want to try to tell the whole story. I want to tell the good and the bad, because we have to tell people the truth, and we have to have people there with us for the hard times for them to really appreciate the good times. And I was fortunate enough that everyone agreed with that. Everybody felt like, people need to hear this story.
So I ordered the book. Highly recommend other people at least going to your website and learning more about it and to check it out. But I have been just started yesterday, because apparently I'm the last person on the planet that even knows that you could listen, stream, audio version. I've heard book on tapes and stuff, but I thought that went the same way that tapes went. So I didn't even realize you could listen to it. But it was your voice, which is, weird. I'm like you're in my headphones. Right now it's fine because we're having a conversation. So was that a decision that you made or the publisher made, didn't you have an option to have somebody else be the narrator of it? Because it was, when I downloaded, it was 6 hours and 17 minutes long or something like that. So was that your decision or their decision? And then how did that process work? You just sit at home with a recorder? How did that work?
Yeah, we had offers from Morgan Freeman and a couple other people, and we said, nah,
What?
no,
Okay.
no.
I was like, holy cow. Yeah.
That was one of the more honestly nerve-wracking and interesting parts of the process. So they do have times where they'll bring in voice actors to do things, and they have times where they ask the author to do it. Because this was such a personal story, they asked me if I'd be interested in doing it. Now, I'd never done anything like that before.
Yeah.
I was very nervous. Everybody hates the sound of their own voice.
Yep.
I was really nervous about sounding like a chipmunk, because you hear people talk, and when you hear your own voice, it sounds like you're, Chip and Dale. And the reality is that it was a great experience. My wife, my little 6-month-old daughter, and we all flew to the city where they were going to be recording it. It was outside Chicago. And I went into the studio, and it took 2.5 days to record. It's only like 6 hours to listen to it.
Yep. That's what I was wondering. Like, how does that work? You just like beginning to end, you just read the whole book, and that can't be true.
Yeah. It took us 2.5 days to do it, and we just do it in chunks. And, the studio that I worked with, Oasis Studios, they were incredible. They were so professional. And what they told me is just be yourself, read it like you feel it. And they would give me coaching on where to slow down or where to enunciate something, or if there was a little mistake that we needed to go back and fix. But they didn't do anything to, try to sanitize it or to try to polish it or smooth it over. They said, read it with the real emotion. So, you'll hear times in the book where you can hear my voice crack, or you can hear tears come my way. So it's not only Adam Jarko and your wife, but it was myself as well as I was reading it. And they said, that's good. That's good feeling. People need to hear the authentic voice. And they thought that was important, since so much of this story was a personal story.
Yeah. How it's been out for a month. How's it going? I see. Obviously I follow you on your Facebook page. I see on Twitter or X. You're going around the book signings. A whole bunch of people are reviewing it. Like even in the back, which is just crazy. Like some of these people that are reviewing your book, New York Times best-selling author, another writer from the New Yorker. I mean, jeepers creepers. So everyone could say it's wonderful and it's awesome and write these wonderful, great reviews. But does that actually equal sales? Like, is it actually, I mean, obviously you probably don't want to get into the details in that, which is fine, but is it going as well as you expected?
I'm happy to speak to it. It's been going really, really well, but it's a constant fight. So the reality is that, great Wisconsin writers like Mike Perry, who has written some incredible stories about rural America. Others were willing to write endorsements of the book, which was such a help. The Associated Press called it an anthem to the family farm, which I was honored to see.
I saw that.
Yeah, we've been doing really well. In the first couple of weeks, we sold through our first printing. So all the books that my publisher printed, we sold through them. Nice. And then we moved on to the second printing. So it's awesome. We moved into the second printing. It means that there's a lot of interest and momentum. But here's the challenge. And anybody who's done anything like this where you're dealing with other parts of the country know this. No matter what they say, Wisconsin is still flyover country. You're competing with what's going on in New York and Washington, D.C. and everywhere else. And so the book has been selling really well. And we're just fighting to keep the momentum going, because we're trying to tell this story, this issue that affects the heartland, that affects rural America. We're trying to make sure that the whole country sees it and hears it. And it's a constant battle. There's new books coming out every day. There's all kinds of political controversies and everything's happening and sweep things up. So, it's been great, but you're competing with what's going on in these great big cities on the coast, and it's a real challenge. So everybody who picks up the book, everybody who spreads it to a friend, everybody who does a review on Amazon, all those things really help. Yeah. And it's meaningful to me. I want the book to sell, but it's more about the meaning of the story and, something that I hope connects with so many people out there too.
Yeah, because I think that's got to be the biggest challenge, right? It's if you are a farmer and you read this book, even specifically a Wisconsin farmer, I think this would probably be pretty much universal across any state. Actually, it doesn't have to be Wisconsin. I think they'd be like, yeah, I know this. I went through it, right? And I'm just saying that would resonate with them. So, like, what's the audience? So we really want to get people who aren't farmers or grew up around this to read it. Yeah. So they actually get to see, holy cow, I didn't know all this, my goodness. So how do you get to them? How do you get to the people that, I'm not saying that would be your audience. I don't know what your audience is. I don't know if you define that or not. But how do you get people that should read this who probably wouldn't be interested in reading it because it's about farms, who cares? How do you get them to read it?
Really, it's about anybody who cares where their food comes from. People who've never set foot in a barn, but they're concerned about their food supply, either because of the price or because of the availability or because of health concerns or whatever the issue may be. That's the big reason for people to get into it. Now, you're right, though. It appeals to people across the board. We've seen people in big cities caring about it because of the food supply. We've seen people in rural areas and small communities really care about it because it's hollowing out a way of life that they know about. And one of the things that I acknowledged in the book that I experienced was, this is a story that will shock people who haven't lived it. It's just like, this is going on, but it'll even sometimes surprise people who have lived it. And what I mean by that is there's so many families, including people who watch this show, who've experienced this, to your point, but they maybe haven't had the opportunity, like I didn't have the opportunity, to see why this was happening. And so when you take what's going on the ground, you combine that with the big storms economically that have been affecting farmers, I found it really enlightening to learn why this was happening. So that's something that, for me, being from rural America, I knew it was happening. I didn't know why. My hope is that everybody else who didn't have any idea it was happening care about it because they care where their food comes from, and hopefully they care for their fellow man, because this is not only an economic crisis but a cultural one.
Yeah, and I think maybe you brought up a good point there, that the people who have grown up on farms, or maybe their parents still own farms, their grandparents, but they're not a part of it now, that until they read it, maybe when they do read it, they'd be like, oh, I thought that was just us. I thought we were the ones that were the only ones going through this. Didn't know other like that was normal. Oh, everybody is going through similar things.
Yeah,
because it's small towns, small farms, and you don't usually hear farmers complain. It's identify a problem, fix it. Identify a problem, fix it, and repeat as necessary until it's all fixed. That's a small farmer, right? It just is.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And that touches on, I say it's an economic cultural crisis. We talked a lot about the economy. It's a cultural crisis because of what it's putting our country through. So our country, so much of who we are and the way we look at ourselves is wrapped up in our family farms. A family farmer is one of those things that America looks at itself and says, yeah, that's one of the things that help build our country. So as we lose our farms, we're losing a part of ourselves. And it's happening in an even more pronounced way with the mental health crisis. There's a mental health crisis in this country for rural and urban alike. In rural areas, it's really much more silent. People don't talk about it. And that's especially true with farm families like mine, where, to your point, people grow up to get out there and get the work done. Keep your head down. Don't complain. That leads to work ethic. That leads to resilience. But it can also lead people to not necessarily talk when they're having problems. And one of the things that we talk about in the book, my dad was brave enough to share, is that after some of the changes on our farm, when we sold our dairy herd, but we still had a way to continue farming, there was a lot of hope there, but there was also a lot of darkness because my dad felt that he'd failed after selling the cows when we'd been milking in this country for 100 years. And he had some dark thoughts about harming himself. And he came through it because he was thinking about the next generation. He was thinking about his grandkids. But the reality is that what he experienced is something so many experience. And I bring that up only because I asked him, are you sure you want to talk about this? And he said, I want people to know. People have to know the truth because we don't want people to think they're alone. So whether it's the economic crisis, whether it's the cultural crisis, whatever people are going through, there's strength, not shame, in speaking up. And so I hope that by getting the word out on this, we can do something about these food issues. We can do something about our disappearing farms, but also we can do something about the impact that it's having on people, because there's human beings on the ground suffering. And by talking about it and getting it out there, we can maybe help.
Highly recommend people check out that book. I think so. Gay Man of My dad raised turkeys for a while, and every time someone ran over a turkey, that's what we have for supper. Nice little levity there, Gay. That was a very nice, good way to bookend the show. Speaking of that, we're up about our time is up. Any last words? Any final thoughts? Anything you want to share?
Well, I appreciate being on. I hope anybody who's interested in it checks out the book. They can find it on Amazon, Land Rich Cash Poor on Amazon, anywhere else online. You can also get it at your local bookstore. Go and ask them for it. They should have it. If not, they can order it for you. And I just hope that anybody who checks it help spread the word on these issues, and that we can raise awareness and do something about it.
Love it. Brian, you're the best. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Special thank you to Brian Reisinger for taking the time to come on and chat about his new book that just got released, Land Rich, Cash Poor. I will see all of you right back here tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m. when I'll be chatting with Milwaukee Brewers President of Baseball Operations, Rick Schlesinger. So until then, for DrydenWire.com, I'm Ben Dryden saying thank you for watching, and as always, have a blessed day.